Hello and welcome to my video series on Adobe Animate. This is my first YouTube video, so hopefully it will go off without a hitch. I'm going to take this from beginner all the way through to doing complex animation, so hopefully that'll be something that grabs your interest, and you should be able to learn quite a lot from this. I'm going to start off with just creating a new document. We're going to be looking at how Adobe Animate works, what keyframes are, and the absolute basics in this lesson. This is the very first in a series that I hope to produce tutorial videos that are really going to help people to develop the knowledge of animation and how to use this piece of software. It is a pretty cool piece of software by all accounts, but it can get very complex at times. So I'm going to start off really simply and easily, and we'll progress quickly through it. Okay, so when we start off with Animate, this is the intro screen that you get presented with, and for the time being we're going to be just choosing HTML5 canvas. This is just a basic canvas, blank canvas for animation stuff, so that's absolutely fine to use. We don't need to be going too heavy with any of the ins and outs of any of this other stuff. We're just going to stick to animation, how it works, and all the principles of the software. So what I'm going to do is just create new HTML5 canvas, okay, and let me introduce you to some of these concepts of the actual interface first before we get started with anything. Okay, so Adobe Animate. So you've got four main areas that you kind of flit in and out of. The first area is this big white square in the middle, which is called the stage, and this is where the action occurs. So anything that's going on that area is going to be there's going to be something going on with it. You've got maybe something moving around, bouncing, walking, facial movements, or just an animation that's going to go across that screen. That screen area there is for example, if I just create an oval or something like that, something quite simply, this oval, if it was half on it and half off it, if I was to export this file as a movie file, it would only export whatever is over the white area of the screen, and it would not export the end of the file. This can be quite useful if you're doing animation work where something is coming onto the screen and appearing from off the screen to on the screen. Okay, so that's the stage, and over here we have the Properties Inspector. Now the Properties Inspector is great because it allows you to have a look at anything that's going on in, whether it's a tool that you're using, it could be a frame in the timeline, it could be the stage itself, it could be the document properties, it could be an object properties, which are generally what we're talking about. So the Properties Inspector is something that you'll keep coming back to because there's loads of stuff that you can do with it. So in this case, at the moment, there's nothing going on. So in the Properties Inspector, what I'm presented with is information about the document that I have, the HTML5 document, published settings and things like that. We've got the frames and the size of the document. All of these things we can change from here, which is pretty cool. And also underneath here we've also got the stage colour, which we can change to a different colour. We can have it black or whatever. So that's the Property Inspector. Pretty straightforward, and we'll get more into that as I go along. The next thing to know about is the toolbar. So down here you've got all kinds of different tools that do loads of different things. And again, this is something else that I'll go through at a later date. We don't need to know this right away. Let's just get the basics down first, and then we'll work through what different things do. In fact, to create decent animation, you won't need to use most of the stuff in the Animate software. There's no point in me going through every single detail of what everything does. because it will just take too long and it won't be useful to you. The best thing to do is just familiarise yourself with the key concepts and then work through from there. So the next thing that I want to show you is the timeline. Okay, this is the timeline down here, and what we're looking at in the timeline is essentially a load of frames which move forward in time. Now this red bar here is a playhead, and at the moment you can see I can try and drag in it and I can't drag it anywhere, and the reason being is there's no frames populating the timeline here. So what I need to do is create some frames. Now just to show you there, these are the frames going across, and as you can see it goes up to 160. That's what's visible on the screen right now. We can have infinite amounts of frames as long as your computer can handle it. And a good thing to try and understand here is what frames actually are. Frames are just moving forward in time. So as this timeline moves forward, different things might occur on that timeline that are represented in the stage, and something changes in the timeline as it moves along. It's just a linear structure. So we're not just working with still images here, we're working with time itself. And each of these frames represents a future instance of something that could occur. And I hope that I'm explaining this simply enough, because it is that simple. It is just literally, it's a timeline. It moves forward in one direction. You go into the future by going to frame 160, and you can move back into the past going to frame 1. Okay, so it's that simple. Now what I've got down here is I've also got a resize option, just so I can show you this a little bit better. There's a resize timeline option down here. So if I scroll in now, and I just want to show you, let's go a little bit microscopic on it so I can really show you what's going on here. So the timeline, the very first frame, this is represented as an empty keyframe, and each of these little boxes here going across are other frames that you can do something with, and we can put other keyframes in other frames and so on and so forth, and it just means that it's going to create something on the screen, it's going to make something look interesting. So the best thing to do for me to show you this is just to actually get a shape for now. Okay, let's just create something. Now you can see that now this bar here, it was empty before, and now it's got a little black dot in it. I'll just delete that. That's how it was originally, and that's how it was after. So that's when it's populated, it's filled, it's got a keyframe. What's known as a keyframe, there's something happening in that frame. Okay, so just want you to get familiar with this idea of the timeline, and this is literally all the thing is for the first lesson, just focusing on the timeline to show you these frames and how they work. I'm going to create a very simple animation which is based around the text tool, and just going to create a piece of text, and we're going to have a look at that, and we're going to have a look at some options. Okay, so I'm going to click onto the stage with the text tool, and it allows me to type something in. So I'm going to type a letter in, and I am just going to show you this in a little bit of detail because it's an important thing to know. As we go through this later on, this will become more evident, and it's kind of good to know because it can really mess about. Okay, so what I've got here, if you notice, around the T is an object box. This is, in this case, it's a text box. So if I wanted to, if I thought, oh, I'll resize that T, I grab this and go like that, that's not going to resize the T for me. All that's going to do is it's going to resize the actual box itself. Okay, so this is a text box. So if I type into this, I just enlarge the text box a little bit, you can see the function of the text box itself. So we have the text fit or parts of the letters go underneath this text, or so on and so forth. So by moving it around, I'm not adapting the size of the text at all, I'm just moving the box, okay? Okay, let me just get rid of that, and I'm just going to pull this text box back to there, okay? So, when I've got a flashing cursor, you can see the box is slightly different, and I've got a flashing cursor now. So, that is, essentially, I'm in text editing mode here. Okay, so there is a difference between these modes, and I'm just going to point that out. Okay, so if I click off, you see I've just gone back to the selection tool there, and it's automatically gone back to the object itself, so I can move this around. Okay, but what I'm going to focus on now is I want to resize that text, and I'm going to do it using the free transform tool. Okay, so if I press, and this is something, if you're used to Photoshop, you might be used to accessing the free transform tool by pressing Command and T or Control T, but in Animate, it's Q, it's just the letter Q. Okay, so if I press Q on the keyboard now, I get free transform box, and it allows me to resize the text. You see? Okay, so when will this not work? If I am in object editing mode, as in I'm typing next to the T and I press Q, it's actually not going to be very effective because it's not the shortcut command, it's actually going to type the letter Q next to the T. Okay, so the shortcut itself is not going to work. I'm just going to shrink that back down. Okay, so here we go, we're back to the T and the object editing. So it's just a brief overview of how things act, and this will become more evident later on, just to let you know for now that there is a difference in the text editing mode, the object mode, and the free transform mode. Okay, so I'm going to just get the T and free transform it, make it a little bit sort of a bit more chunky, and what I'm going to do is create another keyframe next to the one that I've already got, and this will show you more about what I'm talking about with the keyframes and moving forward in time. The keyframe command to create a blank keyframe is F7. So I'm pressing F7 and you can see that the T has disappeared. That's because now on the timeline I have the playheads also move forward. This red playhead I can move between frame 1 and frame 2. I can't move it to frame 3 because there's nothing there. I can move it to a blank, or when something is in it, something's populated. Okay, so I'll just move to frame 2 and grab the text tool again, and I'm going to put a H in there, and again I'm going to just resize it. Okay, so now I've got a T on frame 1 and a H on frame 2. Pretty cool. So I've already essentially created an animation. It's only 2 frames long and it's not that great at the minute. What I'm going to do, I'll just show you another little trick as well, just because it will come in useful, is if you are measuring something out, just say for the sake of neatness, I want to make that H the same size as the T. Okay, so I've got a T there. Now if I go to View and Rulers, and to turn the rulers on, and just click and drag from the top bar to the top of the T, and click and drag from the top bar again, and drag down. And this isn't something that is necessary, it's just if you're OCD about getting this neat. For the purposes of this animation, I'm going to be a bit scruffy with it, I'm not going to be perfect at all, but just to show you, and I might actually just squash that down a little bit, and kind of get it roughly, I'm just going to get it roughly right, I'm not going to spend too long on this. Okay, that'll do. Okay, so 2 frames. Okay, to be honest, it's already looking better. The ruler lines, you're not going to notice when you export the file, they're just literally there as a guide, that's all. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to populate this timeline with frames. Now, this is quite handy as well, I won't save it actually. I'm just going to go to one that I created earlier, just for ease of speed here, okay? And you can see here on this timeline, I've got a number of frames. I've got 15 frames, okay? So I'm just going to grab a few of these frames. These have just got different letters on each of the frames. And I'm right-clicking on them, highlighted the frames. I'm right-clicking on them to access the menu and selecting copy frames from there. And I'm going to come here and paste these frames in. So you can see actually how quick and how cool that is, that I can take one animation and I can copy the frames from it and paste it directly into another animation to save time. And this is the nature of animation really. It's all, everything that you can do to save time, the better. And I don't want to sit here creating each keyframe for you individually, because you'll be sat here for 20 minutes while I'm doing so. So there's a quick way of doing it. Okay, so let me just to talk you through this, let's remove those frames. So I just highlighted and removed those frames, only because I want 12 frames as opposed to 15 frames, just for the ease of mathematically trying to work this next bit out that I wanted to talk about. I'm not too bothered what this says, I don't even know what it says anymore. What we've got here, I'll just preview this animation. So to preview the animation, just to give you an insight into how this is all working, I'm going to press enter, and that playhead is going to move forward at a set speed until it gets to the end of the animation. Now notice how that animation itself was so quick, and I'll just do it again because you may have missed it. That was extremely quick, okay? So this is to do in part because all my keyframes are bunched together in very, very successive order. This is something that you wouldn't do. Realistically, you wouldn't put all your keyframes next to each other like that unless it was something very complex and very slow moving. This is too much of a drastic change over a short space of time. But what this has got to do with is the actual document itself. I'm just going to go to Modify and Document at the top. The shortcut for that is Command J and Control J. And you get into the document settings. Now, this is all to do with the frame rate itself. So down here, you might notice the frame rate is set at 24 frames per second. You know, this frame rate is really, really good for making things look realistic and full motion and things like that. But for what I've just done, it's not ideal. And in fact, most animation work, if you want to save yourself a little bit of time, because you can actually change this down to half of that and save yourself time and processing power at the same time. So let me just explain what's going on here. So this timeline, it skips right through. I've got 12 frames in my animation, and that document setting is working at 24 frames per second. That means that 1 second of visible animation would be 24 frames. So I've got 12 frames on the timeline. That means that I have half a second. I don't even have a full second's worth of animation. Now this is something that I can't even perceive this. We get a general gist of it, but it's subliminal. We can't process all of that information in such a short space of time, half a second. So what I'm going to do is just change the frame rate to 12, so it's half of that. Okay, so now this is a little bit more clear to me what's going on. It's a bit easier to follow. It's a bit easier to show you as well. So I've got 12 frames now, and this animation now is 12 frames per second. So for 1 second, it's going to be 12 frames. So I've got exactly 12 frames. It's still going to be, it's still going to be quick, but it's going to be tolerable. And you can see now that's a little bit easier on the eye. It's still not apparent because to process a frame, 1 frame per second is far beyond our capabilities of of perceiving. So what we have to do now at this point is actually space out some of those keyframes, because they're too close together. We can't get a general sense of what's going on. It's too quick. So what I propose here is that we allow that timeline to be a little bit longer, so we make it 2 seconds instead. There's two ways of doing that. I could go to modify document, and I could change that again to 6 frames per second. And now my animation is working pretty slowly. Okay? There's nothing wrong with doing that in this case, because it's a simple animation. It's not necessary. But I'm just, for the purposes of showing you this, I just want to put it back to 12. It's not always good to keep going down and lower in frame rate. It's not good practice to start working like that, although it can be quick, so you just kind of work things out. But the best way of doing it is to roughly gauge what speed you're going to need and work from there with it, rather than keep lowering your keyframes, because you're going to get to a point where you're on 3 frames per second and it's going to be incredibly slow, and then you need something faster to happen. You can't do it because you're on 3 frames per second, and then you've got to change everything round. So what I propose is something else. We use spacing on the timeline to move things forward a little bit. Okay, so I'm just going to click on the very first keyframe and press F5. Now F5 just means to insert space, and it's called a frame, but we're just generally inserting space, so I'm just going to call it space. And on each keyframe, I'm going to insert another frame. And you can see that this is now moving along the timeline. Click on each keyframe, hit F5, there we go. So, have I missed something? Okay. Yeah, it's about right. So anyways, it's longer than it was, so I've got 22 frames. So I mustn't have had 12 in the beginning. Okay, so I just hit play now, and you can see that's playing a lot smoother. That's like 6 frames per second, but it's 12 frames per second. So it means that I can use fast and slow. I've got flexibility with 12 frames per second. I have less flexibility with 6 frames per second. If I wanted to insert even more time on the timeline, I could do that as well. I can press F5 as many times as I want. I can really extend this. So this first frame, this first T, that stays on the screen until we hit frame 8, at which there's a change in the keyframe. And at this point, it changes to a H, and so on and so forth. But I've created too many frames there. So what I'm going to do is just highlight that and right-click it and remove frames. Okay, so back to normal. This is a really simple keyframe animation. This is just to get started in how to use Animate, how to create your first animation really quickly. Give it a go. Just get a text tool, insert keyframes. The keyframe button is F7 to create a blank keyframe so you can create something new. Notice if I click here and I press F7 now, it just makes everything disappear. So I've inserted a blank keyframe there, and so on. If I do this, this would essentially just strobe things. Things would be flashing around. So I'm not going to do that. It's terrible. But you get the gist. Pretty straightforward. This is our first, my first video. I hope you've taken something from it. I'm just going to clear these keyframes because I'm sick of seeing text everywhere. And hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to create another video soon to advance this and do some cool stuff with that until we can get to some really intricate looking animations. Okay, thanks for watching.